Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not welcoming you. I will tell you if we begin now. And I want to introduce to you before I do begin the fact that this audience, for the sake of Johan over here and John over here, that this audience here, that I see, that I'm so delighted to see, consists of many members of our communities and families that know very well from the days long ago when we used to have something called the Advanced Society for Arts. Who remembers that? Hand up if you do. You do, right? And we had dissected from east to west to all the schools. We had dissected in every school of English, drama, music, art. It was just crazy. You know, apart it didn't affect us. We just went back to that stuff going on. And as a result of that, Mr. Oersen became the coordinator for the music section of the Bosmont Society for Arts. And he did a fabulous job. Of course, he was a teacher to all of us who are here in front of you gathered are in some ways either taught by or inspired by Milton Oersen as musicians. How many of you who are here actually knew or are inspired by Milton Oersen? One, two, yes, quite a few people, you see. And then, in particular, you will see some pictures in it. Bill will tell you about some more. It's going to be Merkel sitting in there somewhere. I think even I'm there. I think the Dorian is there. The Hicks Choir is there. Oh, Mr. Oersen did his last performance here in Joburg when he was 89 years old on the Grand Piano. Terrific, and his last one was recent. But Phil will tell you more about that. I'm not going to talk too much longer. UCT, a number of us are alumni of UCT music faculty. I'm included among all those music faculty people. John, Johan, Stock, I don't know what else. Melvin, Franklin, and many of them became even professors. And they are all here. So I welcome you all to that context for why we are here, because it's often said that we complain a little bit and say, oh, we like the culture, but it's such a lie because we are all over our neighborhoods. And we just don't, because we haven't written down, we haven't acknowledged ourselves. So we think we don't exist. It's probably not true. Because there are hundreds of people who have graduated and continue to graduate in these fields from our community. Right. So, we even have here what I call the legend of Bosmont, William Montgomery, who is what's your honorary mark award called? Legion of Art for France. This is Montgomery. You know that we have a lot of people here who are actually socially aware workers. We have someone here who is the founder of the Rays of Hope, was that? Someone from Streetwise, and many others who I don't know particularly what's done. And in the corner is Corin Matthews, who has done a terrific amount, particularly in the field of mathematics and religion in this space. And he's a mother-in-law, grandmother. Mother, Wilhelmina Hoskins was the founder, the great founder of the Trans-Haven Seaside Fund. So we have here a gathering of people, and the houses will be filled. We couldn't go perform in concert halls, but we performed in our homes like this. And as you can see, Mr. Milton built this house for the concert. There's his stage, and here's his audience, exactly as we intended. So now with that, I will introduce you to his two dear sisters and my dear friends. Daughters. Wilma Oersen and Ingrid Oersen will say something to you. Do you need some?
I'm Vero, not Myra.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
No, I'm not going to, I don't think I'll need the mic. I'm sure, can you hear me there at the back? Yes. Okay, hello everyone.
Sorry, God, you're old.
During the round, I've never looked anywhere else in my life to see here. And this is the home I love. And I was glad to see you all here. My dad's not here, my mom's not here, my brother's not here. But here we are. And we sincerely welcome you all. And you come from all over the country, come and join us, which is wonderful. And my dad would love to be here because this is what we do. I can't tell you how many cups of tea I've made for people and how we had to serve people here while my mom and dad were alive. This is what we do. And sadly, I can't play the piano anymore. I did other things, you know, as children, everyone, each one went in his own direction or something. And I went up to 13 level, 30 years very happy. We want to achieve. And this is what I have to say, but I'm serious. You know, I hope all of you will find you. Or yes, all of you are really happy to be proud of it. Because I think it was a great asset to the community and to so many students. I remember this man sitting here. He used to come and think his Milton beautifully. Every second week, it's for Anthony Swans. Right? Am I right, Anthony? Every week. Every week, yeah. And if you didn't know if you hadn't been diligent enough to practice, then you would say, listen, my boy, when you come here, then you are coming for a music lesson. You must practice at home. You're listening because you half an hour. But I think you should go home now. Then you have more time to do that. And then even students, and I remember there was one student, what he used to do, I won't mention any names, and I don't think it's where to go, so I won't be hurting on the floor. And he used to come to the coach. We had a dog who used to sit there for the food. And we would go home and say, the dog wouldn't get and my dad used to stand at that window and he used to see him doing things to the dog, pleasing the dog because we don't practice. And that was it. But anyway, he was happily ever after a year in this home for many years. We went to the Eastern Cape. We found the Eastern Cape, to the Eastern Cape, and that's where he lived out his last days. And I think that's the end of the story.
Now we're going to need to tell the story about his performance in the City Hall and what someone asked you.
Oh, okay. I remember, well, this my mom and dad, you used to afterwards. I was a little thing like that for 4 years old. And I was sitting next to my father's music teacher. My father's music teacher. His name was Oersen. And my father played the Greek concerto in the City Hall. And when it was all over, you know, there was the audience was so in awe of his performance. Everybody stood up and they were clapping. What would these people are mad? Why don't they can sing in voice? And they were going to such a big concert. And then Heinz heard them and asked him, he said, you know, my darling, don't you think your father played marvelously? So I said, no, Dad's only practicing. He practices like that. But really, I only got to know one of the things I know really good. But it was fun. Everybody, and my father and Heinz Hirschman repeated it to everybody, much to my shame. I think that's all I have to say. I hope you all enjoyed the little performance, the big performance, and some wonderful guests of ours. John Theodore, and Johannesburg.
Thank you. Thank you.
How much it is?
I saw in the chat that your brother's not alive any longer. I had a brother, Carlson. I thought I would marry one day. He would only look like Elvis Presley. He acted like he actually performed in the city hall in those early days. He was a wonderful pianist, but then he became a little rebellious and he couldn't, whatever. And then the cappuccino, Mr. Oersen, used to be a great friend of his, what is his name? Not what? The Schimmel family.
The Schimmel family. Yes, they owned the piano school.
Carl couldn't find his job, so Schimmel said to Mr. Oersen, listen, Milton, I've got a job. Carl, because you can hear tunes, you can play tunes, you know scales and all that. You can come and work on the training to get piano too. So he did. Carl went all over the place to tune the piano, including some of mine around at different places. And then at one point, Schimmel needed someone to go to the Congo, to the piano of Albert Schweitzer. And he literally sent Carl to go up to Congo. And I think that's such a divine experience, don't you? Mm-hmm. Carl. Okay. Now, I think Carl. You want the mic?
Yes.
Do you want to?
Yes, use the mic.
Thank you. When you get through the phone. It's a point where we're chatting in a car and we said it's going to be a small community. We all attend the music here and always the same time. So don't have it with my brother, but recently and then I came and then the rest came. But it's always that we will follow. Yes, what do we call this? This heritage. We were saying, it seems like it is passed on from one to the other, and that's what happened to us. I had stories about my brother from him that I didn't know. Maybe I will this
stuff here. Netflix thing.
well, good evening, everybody.
This is yours, Chad, yeah.
Yeah. Context.
Here's the file you just sent now.
With that submission, I'd like to say
It's not there.
two things about context for this week. Tomorrow
I think the email came through.
is it Freedom Day. Tomorrow is Freedom Day. And Friday is the day when the legendary
Yeah, the email came through. Okay,
band
thank you.
leader, Solomon Linda, will receive the Order of Ikamanga in the gold category for his song in Homage, which was then translated into Wimmelwear. And I read an article.
10 seconds. Yeah, we come here at
this.
I just want to give him the.
That it's been covered something like 195 times or maybe even more if one counts accurately about. And so Homage exists under many different covers. You know what I mean? Different covers. So he's going to be, his family will, of course, probably soon be the recipients of that award. And then I'm just thinking, how do we fit Milton into this whole picture? Surely there's something that can be done.
Most of this, I'll change.
In these states as well. When I was at the University of the Western Cape as head of music for the past 10 years, he was an M.Mus performing student, and he did his entire recital from memory, and his external examiner was none other than can anybody pick up on this? Tell me who he was. Franklin Larry. Franklin Larry is making big waves in the United States. He's got a very, very senior appointment, I think, at Indiana University as head of music there. So none other of the stature of Franklin Larry, who's an alumnus of UWC, was Milton's external examiner. And Milton wrote his thesis about an orchestra of color called the Spesbona Orchestra, which existed alongside the Cape Town Symphony Orchestra many years ago. So we should not downplay ourselves. There are heroes of yesteryear, but believe me, when I tell you this, we have heroes even today, some of them still unsung. But tomorrow or the day after, they will also be proclaimed heroes. We need to keep our ears to the ground and be in constant contact with youngsters and say exactly what it is that they need to do in order to play the flute, the piano, etc. to perfection. And of course, Milton was right. It's not necessary to practice in front of people. That's absolutely spot on.
Lots and lots of
talk about.
One thing the wall made even from the community of the ocean, but of course a national award would be great because he was also the first black performer in the city hall with an orchestra in 1950 in the Doors Club.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's what I'm aiming towards. And please enjoy the rest of your program. Thank you.
Thank you.
We move on to thank the sponsors, the Fulbright, Sub-Saharan Africa Travel Program. That's the program that Johan enjoys the privilege and benefits from. They flew out from Tanzania to America because they had a broken leg. That's not allowed to sponsor. We also want to thank Ron for coming from Tanzania. To do this, and thank you, John, for all the hard work that you've done. And we'd like to thank all the families who contributed in more ways than one. Of course, the Oersen family, the Jacobs family, the Young family, the Cannell family. I'm not sure if my family should be on this list, but anyway, we thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, I will sit down and introduce you, not by word, because you will introduce himself. Our professor here, who you want to know, sitting at the back there is a man who wrote a great book about jazz in South Africa. Look at Mr. Oersen's jazz picture up there. We also have other professorial people here, Franklin Lewis, who is retired and you know already, there he is. And so we welcome you into a community of people who are one with you.
Thank you so much.
Excuse me a moment, we can just pass here.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Welcome. My name is Johan Beys. I, like John Theodore, was a product of the Holy Cross Convent, the tutelage of two nuns, the latter of which had most influence on our lives, Sister Cecily Marzig from St. Gallen in Switzerland. And in that way, we were formed in a secluded, apartheid segregated community. The one place where we could integrate was in the convent music studio. And inadvertently, by getting 6 local privileged members of the community who were trained music teachers who had to teach us, because we were no longer able to be welcomed by nuns when boys reached puberty according to the rules of the congregation that they belonged to, we ended up going back through the persistence of my dad, lobbying that another provincial, the highest authority of this convent order, the Holy Cross nuns out of Switzerland, that they would reconsider their law. And lo and behold, she was so touched by the fact that 6 teachers turned me down for accepting me. We know in the context that, of course, if they accepted their first person of color into their studios, the rest of the studio would collapse because all the other parents would withdraw their children. So inadvertently, we got the very best teacher in this town because she was trained by the same teacher in St. Gallen who trained her concert pianist, Professor Paul Baumgartner of the Hochschule in the Music Academy in Basel, Switzerland. And he was a very famous European concert pianist. So that beautiful experience was the way in which we found ourselves to compete, audition, and pass whatever other accolades came our way. So I want to pay tribute to Sister Cecily. It's also a beautiful privilege that since I left South Africa in 1982, and for 20 years could not return to my home country because I was interrogated for an hour and a half on June 26, 1986 by an official, the vice consul of the Chicago consulate, and she threatened me with my imprisonment should I return to South Africa. I clearly had overstepped my bounds because I was an activist speaking out against my country's unfair practices that made me a citizen, and most of our people in our own country, citizens without representation, without the vote. And so, yes, my experiences of speaking out against my country, both in the United States and in Austria, where I studied at the Mozart University, those were surveyed and put under surveillance, and the records were cited to me during my interrogation, during that hour and a half. They knew the minutiae of where I had gone, what I had done, and what I said. And so, in that context, I couldn't return. You can imagine thinking every time when you go up the stairs to your apartment, will the phone have a message of somebody passing away, your parents, your relatives, and so on, and you would not return to bury them. And so after the 20 years afterwards, in 2003, we managed to return, and from that time on, I visited South Africa on and off sporadically until now, when I can now speak publicly in lectures, and next week I'll be in residence at Rhodes University, teaching for the first time in South Africa for 41 years. This is not only a homage in honor of Mr. Milton Oersen, but it is also a homage to a country that I love dearly, and for the people who I love dearly. And in that context, the one person who was an adopted brother to me, little boy prodigies from primary school on, people in our neighborhoods and in our region, the towns of Oersen, Mossel Bay, George, Ladysmith, all these towns that we were concertized in as grade school kids, were obviously amazed, but also they accepted that it's only normal that kids play music at this level and so on. And we got that affirmation from a community in the Southern Cape. I return to pay back that affirmation with this dedicatory lecture to Milton Oersen. I titled this lecture, Apartheid in Search of Black Musical Human Dignity. If the people at the back have difficulty seeing, you are welcome to stand and see the slides here. So feel free to do that. You might even stretch your legs in the process. I titled this, Apartheid in Search of Black Musical Dignity. the unknown legacy of Milton Oersen, born 1918, the same year as Nelson Mandela, and outlived him by 3 years, 2016, South Africa's first black child prodigy and South Africa's first black concert pianist. And no one has used this sobriquet of him as the first black concert pianist. I'm doing so tonight. And I will tell you why. Because many of us and the scholars I'm talking about in the music scholarship community have never heard of Milton Oersen. I can say that on good authority. And if they heard of him, they might have known that he was a music inspector and so on and so forth. But what they don't know is that he fulfills, and I'm making the argument in this lecture tonight, that he fulfills the requirements to be christened, to be named first black concert pianist of South Africa. Although there are no recordings and a whole variety of other criteria that we will discuss. But I am making that claim and I'm taking you on that journey. Giftedness does not respect a person's standing in society. Paupers, princes may all receive artistic gifts at birth. And it is a human tendency to tell our personal stories so that we can look good. We censor the unpleasant parts of our story. Unfortunately for historians of apartheid era, such as myself, they have the thankless task of addressing both the virtues and the vices of human actions during the period 1948 to 1994. Nadine Gordimer, the Nobel laureate, characterized this period of apartheid as an interregnum period, living in the interregnum published in 1983. The regnum, of course, is a Latin word for reign, R-E-I-G-N, which begs the question, what are the reigning periods? Therefore, the interregnum period is circumscribed by two historic dates: the Sharpeville Massacre of 1960 on the one end, and the election of Nelson Mandela in 1994 on the other. Conveniently, one could broaden the era to a general reign of colonial era and the reign of post-apartheid era. The apartheid historian, in search of truth, examines the period of racial oppression, giving credit wherever credit is due. The music historian examines the societal and historical structures of the era, and simultaneously they examine the Western European concert tradition, what I will call WECT, as Leo Treitler, the scholar musicologist, has called it. The minefield of apartheid era in the context of WECT raises multiple questions about elitism and commonality. It raises questions about cultivated and vernacular traditions, concert tradition versus popular traditions. It raises questions about ethnic identities, whose music is it? It raises questions about people who are self-taught, autodidacts, and of people who are highly trained over many, many years in certain art forms. It raises questions about public exposure and private exposure and no exposure at all. It also raises questions about the competition and performance-related issues, private and public patronage of radios, TV, and other kinds of patronage, as well as scholarship and opportunities for funding of the artist. And so, in this context of multiple questions, I purposely isolate the question of concert tradition because I do not want to give over and resort to taking the position that music of people of color is by definition music of the vernacular, of the popular music, of the intuitive music, of the people who are unlearned, of all those questions and assumptions that people normally make of whose music it is. So I'm making the argument that it's the giftedness, it's the fact that the child prodigy was born in Randfontein in 1918, and that child prodigy took it into the direction of long-term training, dedicated work, and rose to the height of the profession, obscured from the public gaze. Milton Oersen, 1918, 2016. There we have the picture of him in the most regal of moments in his career. Could I have the next slide, please?
Change the slide.
Yes, please. I'll just prompt you. So, in the next slide, I'm making the argument that Milton Oersen straddles the entire gamut of the century, of the previous century, and a fair amount of the current century. And we, as historians, think of it as people born in certain time capsules. Those born in the 1920s to 1945, roughly the generation of Milton Oersen, born in that time, we refer to them, and Abdullah Ibrahim and others, in the context of those who left the country. Miriam Makeba, yesterday, Belafonte died at age 96, was the great proponent of Miriam Makeba, and Yuma Sekela and others who left and settled in exile in places outside South Africa. And then we could think of the second period that Milton Oersen's life straddled, which is the one under discussion, 1945 to about 1975. People in that generation were the apartheid era generation. I count myself in that, and people of my generation. Then the people born 75 to 95, they are the the transitional democratic era, and eventually from 95 on, those born in that context are the people of the post-apartheid generation. Now, next slide, please. We come across this man, who is the first teacher of Milton Oersen, Mark S. Radebe, or in the Eastern Cape they say Radebe, Junior. He was the son of a man by the same name, born in 1869. And Milton Oersen's first piano teacher was both the son-in-law of John Knox Bokwe, the famous Eastern Cape hymn writer who studied in Scotland. He had two daughters, one married Radebe, and the other one married Professor Z.K. Matthews. And so from that elite colonial moment in the early intellectual history of South Africa comes this man who was fairly capable as a pianist and wrote weekly columns, and he had a particular position. We're privileged to have David Copeland in our midst, and David writes in his seminal book that Ruth referenced, In Township Tonight. Here's Mark Radebe's quote, jazz is a, quote, a perversion of the remarkable syncopating rhythms to be found in the native music of many races. The Negroes, we are told, contributed some, but it is libel upon our brethren to lay the crime of jazz upon them. End of quote, David Copeland. This statement was made in 1933 that he quotes there.
Let's just acknowledge you. Put your hand up there, David. Come. There you are.
The gifted musician and music teacher who wrote under the nom de plume musicus, Latin for musician, in the publication Umteteli Wabantu. Next slide, please. If that's the case, that this controversial question of denouncing jazz was so evident to Milton Oersen's first teacher, I want to quote from Milton Oersen's own writing of his unpublished memoir. Referring to Mark Radebe, he said, "The legacy that Mark Radebe left with me during the early years of my piano studies had never dimmed throughout my long life." He's writing this towards the end of his life, Milton Oersen, that is. And Milton continues, to recall, he would say, quote, "Master the music of Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven to become a good pianist. It never occurred to me that one lifetime was barely sufficient to master even one of those great composers. Nevertheless, that ideal remained my lifelong guiding star. And although I never reached anywhere near, my life was brilliantly illuminated by the happy and endless pursuit of that elusive ideal." What was Milton Oersen's answer as a young man in his early 30s to this? And of course, he was impressionable and at the time when he studied with Radebe. But later as an adult, next slide please, he participated in performing jazz. Here's a picture of him taken in 1933 of him playing the alto saxophone or holding the alto saxophone. And then the next slide please. And
Just not do it in a normal state.
okay, we'll do it that way. We'll choreograph it. And then this next slide is very telling because we find that Milton Oersen is the person with the saxophone on that side, second from the right seated, but this is a certain Mr. Taylor, clearly, and this is a man called Bobby Umalo. Then you had others, Johnny Pretorius and Philip and so on. And they called themselves the Midnight Follies, 1933, and this tells us that the practical realities of earning an income or earning some income through music was Milton Oersen's rationale for being part of this elite urban expression of social entertainment where his talents were clearly needed. And so we recognize that there is clearly the practical versus the philosophical in his attitude towards Mark Radebe's elitist point of view. However, in addition, we have him also being a choir director at St. Albans from 1946 to 1967, and during that time we see that his affiliation with the Anglican Church, which was a long-held one, was one also for musical accomplishment and so on. Just a quick footnote, one of his students who eventually turned to the organ now currently lives in Basel, Switzerland. Louis van Niekerk from Port Elizabeth was a piano student of Milton Oersen's, and today he is one of the leading organists in the city of Basel, being the organist of one of the three major churches in that
I just
context.
want to interrupt you for 1 minute because there's a very special person here. Henry Merkel, where are you? Put your hand up. Henry. Henry Merkel's family is part of a diaspora of at least 6 musical families here in Johannesburg that go back to that time and before, and are included in some of the bands that Mr. Oersen played in. And he doesn't just do Langarum, but he's also a music teacher. And one of when I called him, I said, Henry, you need to call the Merkels, the Thorns, the Fix, the Moyes, all of the Marts, the Ecksteins, you know, in my case, the Youngs, the Adamses, all of them are here, and your people, we know them.
This is why this presentation is one of a kind. We are getting primary source references from secondary sources who knew. And this is one of the joys of being able, for me, to be able to capture.
And one more, St. Albans. Who else is St. Albans here? I know Crane Sardine family was Albans. There are other people here. We're actually in that choir, and those pictures are in there.
Thank you. This is rich. This is very rich. Thank you. I like your interlocutor.
Yeah, well, you know.
Do that. Yes. All right. Very good. We wish we could record it at the Avenue for further
You're
research.
recording it over there.
I hope so.
All right. Excellent. I like to have a copy. Now, why do we make the argument of the first black concert pianist? Here are some of the conventional criteria. You must have public exposure, otherwise you're not a concert pianist. Number two, you must have extremely significant exposure to the radio and television and other forms of public exposure beyond your in-person exposure. You have to have the accomplishments of technique that have in your repertoire several piano concertos, soloist with an orchestra, and you have to have performed them in public. It's not good enough to have played them in a practice room. And furthermore, you need to have the reviews of critics who testify to the virtue of your performance and the skills and so on. In addition, you also would be fostered and patronized by folks who had scholarship, competitions, and you would then also have opportunities for further study under other kinds of sponsored programs because you couldn't do it by yourself. Clearly, we don't have at this moment recordings of any of these performances. And I'm waiting to hear if...
Excuse me, how's the recording going then?
I hope it's going on.
We hope it's going right.
Okay.
Make sure the switch is on. Last time we recorded, they said, oh, we forgot to turn the switch on.
He's a professional. All right.
Family members. So.
Yeah. So, and the other thing is that also, in the context of the Separate Amenities Act, you had a strict, legal enforced segregation of people of various ethnic and racial groups mixing together in public audiences, as well as participants taking entry fees where they were performing of a different racial ethnic group. And all these kinds of legalisms made structural obstacles for public exposure. And this is a unique phenomenon in the country of people who have been born in that country. And I mention this as a matter of record. I mention it as a matter of record. It's rare that you get this phenomenon in other parts of the world. Brazilians who have the best talent and see the best talent fostering. So do Germans, so do Japanese, wherever you are, Australians, you name them. Any African country will do that, except South Africa. And this is the pernicious problem that we better not gloss over. And that is that this question of being a concert pianist yet isolated from your public and from the opportunities of sponsorships for further study and competing internationally and being trained internationally, because that's the field in which you move, those opportunities were not available and many times held back from people of color. And Milton Oersen is my test case for the fact that there was no shortage of talent, and of course here's the other word, incessant practicing. He was a phenomenal practicer. An incessant practicer. Though he decided to enter the government structure as an elementary school teacher, as a school teacher in the other schools, in high schools and so on, and then on to the inspectorate. He was part of the structure. And in doing so, he had an interesting way of subverting the structure that was intended to place him into a box that the expectations were way below his capabilities. And this is critical. So here you have the one satisfying, accomplishing goal for Milton Oersen. He had house concerts preparing him for the multitude, and I mention a multitude of examinations for professional diplomas, associate diploma, licentiate diploma, and fellowship diploma in that order. And these were examined by examiners sent out from the British headquarters, London, the Associated Board of the Royal Schools, and the Trinity College of London. And these people examined, they validated the accomplishment, and they were an audience of one.
Sorry, the teacher's going to stand up one more time here and say, Milton Oersen was also a member of something very elite called the NISA Club 100. These were the elite people in the NISA thing, and he was a member. So he transcended barriers just because of his accomplishment, although, you know, the story often was, well, you weren't so public about it, but he had it. It was there, he had it, he was accepted. And the one last teacherly thing I'm going to say is, there is a problem we often have in our mixed community of many cultures. We forget that we are all cultures. We think that because we have to identify with either black or we have to identify with white. Why can't we identify with it all? Because we are all, if you look at our surnames, we have the surnames of every country in the world. They are part of our tradition. We are part of both communities, the global community and the African community. So let's get a life of this. Okay.
Therefore, we find ourselves then that the search for human dignity is at the very heart of this matter. Next slide. Wasn't all black resistance in apartheid a search for human dignity? And I make the argument that it was. Nelson Mandela sacrificed his life for that principle, for search for human dignity. And there is the parallel that Milton Oersen, in chapter 4 of his unpublished memoir, titles it, I Was a Musical Freedom Fighter. And he makes no bones about the fact that while Nelson Mandela, the man born the same year as him, his contemporary, was in prison for that principle of justifying his human dignity, Milton Oersen sat in this house, in this room, practicing because he wanted to affirm his own musical dignity through accomplishing these examinations, knowing it would only be for an audience of one, sharing it with the community and friends, and knowing they would enjoy it, but it also gave him professional validation such that he could advance in his own career and become an inspector and so on. But the flip side of that is that he clearly had accomplished the kind of separate independence of mind and thinking that challenged the structures that he was working under. You get that? That he challenged the structures that he worked under through his intellect and through his competence at the piano. And when people minimized and pointed to rule obeying types of minutiae that were inconsequential, Milton Oersen called them on that, and his memoir cites many of these anecdotes where he had these face-to-face, dignified emphasizing of his own credibility in terms of his own dignity. And for me, this is a remarkable thing, because this country's system that fortunately we no longer have to abide by had the unfortunate circumstance of internalizing superiority and internalizing inferiority. And inevitably, many times, the point of least resistance was to accept and react to your internalized inferiority. Let me close before, next one please, and to mention 3 moments of public exposure. It was mentioned already, but this is the picture of Milton Oersen at the piano in just 73 years ago on Thursday last week, when he played the Grieg piano concerto, and there is in Johannesburg City Hall with the Johannesburg Symphony Orchestra, and Beryl mentioned the little incident there. But it's also points to next slide. It also points to the fact that despite those teachers who resisted teaching him, he found foreign-born teachers like Heinz Hirschfeld, who actually was a champion and prepared him for this kind of event. And as I mentioned, that tradition of foreign-born teachers being influential is also one that John, Theodore, and I can attest to. Next slide. Here is the bill, and of course, one of the items there is that it is sponsored by the Colored and Indian Blind Welfare Association. You can read in the rich social commentary into that little heading there. Next slide. And then the second moment of public exposure as a piano soloist with an orchestra was in 1960 at the Johannesburg Festival, when he played the Mozart Concerto number 23 in A major, K488. And then the last one was the performance of Handel's oratorio Judas Maccabeus, conducted by his fellow Radebe student, who was a few years younger than him. He became the first professor of music at Zululand University. I'm speaking of Sibongile Kumalo's father, who happens to be Kabi Ngoma. And so Kabi and Milton worked together already as students, and they knew each other as students of Mark Radebe, but they continued collaborating here in 1964, where Milton Oersen was the accompanist with the oratorio of Judas Maccabeus, and of course that's the story of resistance of the Jewish people to the Roman rulers.
I will add one point there. Milton Oersen was literally the piano teacher of Kabi and Ngoma. We often had events here. Kabi would come and sit here with his socks off and whatnot, because it was a place to relax and have a, what do they have that? A tipple. Yes. So what is interesting, and I'm going to add this because I hope that you will take this thought in mind. Here in Johannesburg, we are not a colonial city. We are an industrial city. And whatever we have to do to survive, we do to survive. And that is the route that music took here. The resistance here in Johannesburg, when they called apartheid, we forgot about that and we did it in our houses. Kabi came here, we had, although we had to take those things, Colored in Indian Blind, you know, it was like, oh my God, why do we have to put that there? But you did it so that you could continue to have your real life. So that you played the game a little bit. Yeah. A lot of the Cape Townians don't like to hear us say that, but we are survivors here. And the resistance to apartheid here was very, very, happened through culture in the way Milton did it, the Bartelsman Society, the arts, and Transhaven. That's how they did it. Okay.
So, how did he have this internalized resistance that he manifested? I argue that he did this through a number of ways. Number one, as I pointed out, this fanatical, incessant practicing. When he was in his early 90s, I visited him, and on that occasion, he said, I am practicing my Scriabin etudes 5 hours a day. Tonight we will be receiving 4 of those Scriabin etudes on the program. And that's one reason why the program is chosen to reflect Milton Oersen's repertoire, because he was an interpreter of a wide variety of pianistic literature. A second item was, of course, his insistence that everything he learned he wanted to memorize, whether it was an entire concerto or an entire fellowship, diploma, exam, and so on. Again, the validation of the audience of one being the examiner and the credentialing as validation. I'm going to quickly run to the fact that all of his validations and credentials were from the lowest, the elementary school, all the way through to his diplomas and eventually of his bachelor's degrees as well as his master's degree at age 82, received cum laude. Incidentally, the supervisor for his exam was Professor Franklin Larry, who was my student in 1979. Next, please. The house concerts and the credentialing were manners of using this internalized resistance. Let's move on to the next. All right. And then I just want to quickly cite a moment that highlights the impact of these house concerts. 1968, Milton Oersen arrived as the new inspector of music in Bosmont, part of his circuit. And on that occasion, my parents invited friends, John, of course, as well, and his family, and then us, and then several other friends and lovers of music to share a dinner that evening. And then after dinner, we retired to our living room. Next, please. And there's a picture of John and me at about the ages that we were 13 and 12 in 1968. There's an examiner from England, William Corbett, and you can see, if you can, at the bottom, far in the right-hand corner is a white habit of a nun. So they were part of these events. Next slide, please. And so today's program is one that reflects Milton's love and performance of the Bach preludes and fugues, what one scholar called the Old Testament of piano repertoire, and then from the New Testament of repertoire, according to that scholar, comes the Beethoven sonatas, and we'll be performing the first movement of the Waldstein. Notice it takes about 10 minutes. There are 4 Scriabin etudes, and then the one work that is written by a living composer born 1974, one of those transitional musicians. He's Bongani and Dodana Breen, currently professor of theory and composition at the University of Cape Town. And there are 2 movements of the piece, so be aware of that. Umtlalo Lemjala, come on. Umtlalo Emlanjeni. Thank you. And so it's called Games at the River. And then we will finish with a fantasy impromptu by Chopin.
And
I'm
I
going
want
to go
to say,
to the end.
before you go there, I want to tell you that Inderdan Green, who's a great friend of Brooks and mine, wrote us a note. When we sent him a note of a program, he said, wow, Johan Weiss was my mentor at Columbia University. I can't believe this connection and this network. So he sends his greetings and he thanks you.
Thank you so much.
Particularly for doing this bond that you are doing.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. And let me close. I think the best testimony of human dignity affirmed through music in the life of Milton Oersen is in his own memoir. He writes about the experience of being a student of my student, Franklin Larry, who was 42 years younger than him. And Franklin Larry, who started taking piano lessons at age 16 in Malmesbury, came to UWC after he was rejected at UCT and eventually became the Dean of Music at UCT many years later. About this experience, he says, Franklin Larry, 42 years younger than Oersen, and his master supervisor, was the one who restored my humanity, which was devastated but not completely obliterated by colonialism and apartheid. My soul was still intact. Although I was always confident in my playing and in whatever else I did, there was always the latent sense of being inferior. One of the cardinal aims of white politics to propagate the inferiority complex in non-whites. Franklin's approach and guidance and his own concert pianist status wholly restored my humanity. I was as good, if not better, than the vast majority of professional musicians. On that basis, I sailed through 1999 and graduated early 2000 with cum laude in the Master of Music degree at the ripe old age of 82. And then just as a little smile, he adds this little addendum. I might add that I performed the entire whole prescribed music program from memory. End of quote. My dear friends, I've indulged you longer than I deserve. I thank you for your attention. I am going to hand the moment over to my dear adopted brother, John Theodore. As he comes to the piano, please return back to the slide with the program if we can. And can you do so?
If you don't mind, may I ask?
To the program.
These
Yeah.
papers you have the program written on it.
But they are too small. They are too small.
But the point is we want to see the pianist.
We can see the pianist. This is not going to interfere. We need the program. Okay. There we go. Back.
This.
There we go. So you can follow the program, and just remember that the Ndana Breen piece has two movements.
Okay, that's your chair over there.
Right. Thank you so much. And now, John Theodore.
But John, stand up for your applause. And I want to tell you about John. When I went to Mr. Oersen's funeral, I flew down to his funeral. I looked around at all his relatives, and I actually thought this was one of his sons because he looks so much like him. He does. That's what he is. It's like, he looks like you. Okay, and the last thing, before you start, I know you'll calm me down. I wanted to acknowledge the presence here of Mr. Schofield, who is the father of Karen Schofield, who's just been appointed the director of What's It Choral and all of this at Stellenbosch University. And she also followed Skulk and myself as lecturers at Rand College. So congratulations to her on a great accomplishment for our community. Hi, Milton.
I just want to acknowledge a few people here. I think it's appropriate. I was very pleasantly surprised. I mean, this is such an auspicious occasion to be in Mr. Oersen's home, and to hear that he played on the 20th of April 1950 the Greek concerto for the first time in Johannesburg City Hall. 45 years ago, I spent the weekend with a lady sitting there, Dr. Edith Merton-Janches, very dear friend of my father, and I prepared for the Greek concerto in the Cape Town City Hall 45 years ago, Sunday, April the 2nd.
Oh.
And I would also like to say thank you for the attendance of my dear friend Heather. Wonderful seeing you here too. Also an alumni of all of us from the city. Thank you. Just remember the two games are two games. All right. Very hot in here. Also, thank you, Lanny and Griffin, my cousin Lanny, also playing especially here. I'm very glad for Lanny to see. Ik kan niet wachten om die laatste stuk te spelen. Okay. I want to take pictures with the people I mentioned, please.
Yes. Yes. So, can you kindly sit down, please? Thank you. Can you sit down for a minute, please? Thank you. My special darling Brooks. I love you dearly. My husband. Very hard. Thank you, darling. Sorry. I just wanted to say one thing. Beryl's just gone to get a thank you card. Unfortunately, we didn't buy wine for you guys. We thought, you know.
We belong to the IoT.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, the only far we got was Beryl, the things are there and there. As far as we got was, we decided, as you can see the beautiful classical poster there, we decided to laminate one for each of them. The big one is, of course, for John.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that is for your talking, and that is for your writing. These gentlemen, you know, they came here on their own pocket and are playing gratis, which I don't know if this is a professional performance if you're not getting paid. And Scarf very kindly fetched them and take them back to the airport and is accommodating them. That's how we do it in this community. And Bill will come in 1 second to talk about what's on the wall there and tell about this. And don't go yet. Chocolates, please. Bring the chocolates, please. Okay, then.
Okay. That's just a short memory of my father's life. On the top left there, that is when he was a jazz musician playing in his band. The second picture, the middle picture there, that was when he graduated from UNISA with a BA in music education. And then the next.
And you may tell about that picture that you don't want to tell about. Tell about that.
I'll tell about that picture.
Go for it.
The next picture is when my dad received his degree at UNISA, and in those days nothing ran. My father actually got a BA music degree in a tent. Really? This was in 1974. What a disgrace. Sadly. But anyway, that's the story. The next one there, down there is when he graduated at UWC with his master's cum laude. I actually went to Cape Town, my sister and I were in Cape Town for that occasion. And then our poster is beginning to give way there. The Heritage concert, which was down the road, I don't know if everybody knows Bosmont, at the St. Barnabas College. And there's Ruth, there's Arthur A, there's Henry Merkel, the Dorian Choir, Mr. Peterson, and it was a huge community success. And this is what we do in this community. This is what we still like to do. It's just that people are so scarce lately. I can't find them. I don't know, maybe because of our moving on, Ruth.
Our age.
Oh my
God.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about. And the top right one there, that was also at the concert. There is practicing. There you can see Ruth, and the two last pictures there. That was in Cape Town, my sister and I, and a few other family friends. We were celebrating his 90th birthday, and that was also the last time he was able to play his piano. Thereafter, he was suffering from arthritis and he really couldn't play with it. However, he managed to live to the ripe old age of 90. And I must mention, this is just a little private story. I was in Cape Town that morning, and my father said to me, I want to go to Stellenbosch. I said, okay, let's go to Stellenbosch. It was not far from where we live. And he said to me, but I'm driving because it's my car. That's how my father was. You can ask some of his ex-students, am I right? Yeah. He said to me, I'm driving because it's my car. 98, who still drives at 98? I'm not quite sure. So he said, well, you can drive back, but please be careful because it's my car. Okay, Daddy, I will drive carefully and please keep it home safely. And that was it was such a sad moment for me because he felt so hopeless, but his mind was so active and so. I can't even explain to you, you know. We used to talk until midnight. The whole neighborhood was fast asleep and we were still talking. Right, Anthony? My father was a talker. Yeah, but he was a talker. And here we are in our old family home, where we've been living for 60 years. I've never known any other home. I'm still here. I don't know for how long, but I'm thankful to be here. And I am so happy to have welcomed you here. I don't know when we'll be able to do that again.
Next year.
Well, I hope we can do something, Beryl, because you see it says the first heritage concert. That was inspired by Milton Oersen. After that, we did 2 more in 2 years after that. And then, of course, St. Barnabas changed, administration and all that, and the great, the man Doug Sumner, who had especially tuned an amazing grand piano, just for the sake of Mr. Oersen coming to play, of course, retired, and he took his grand piano with him, and so on. And so, Beryl, about this.
So I would like to thank Professor Johan Beys for having come all the way, and Mr. John Theodore. I'm so thankful that you have come here into this heritage home, and just here where you were playing, when you played that Chopin piece, it reminded me so of my dad. And thank you, John. It was really great. And Johan.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much. And we thought that the guys should get the poster, but their wives should get a beautiful picture they can frame. So, there, and the beautiful picture that your wife can frame.
Thank you so much.
And we want to thank Hero and oh God, it's 74, I remember. Ingrid, Bill, all these guys, and especially the hidden Oersen relative in the corner here. Cannell, which is another musical family. Mr. Oersen married a band music beauty in his first wife. Yes, and then the last thing I want to say is the gentleman here would very much like to take pictures and meet certain people, particularly Henry Merkel. So please come over and meet people. Franklin Lewis, please come and meet, and David, who is hiding over there. He's so tall he can't hide there. He must come over and meet. And it's a bit hard to meet him here, so let's meet him outside in the courtyard and schmooze and moose. And as you go out, I'm going to offer you some chocolates. I'm afraid I don't have, we didn't prepare anything else. It was just that. So take a nice chocolate. And please stay in touch with us. We hope that you can help us be part of a sort of revival again. That was one revival, 2007. Now it's 2023. We must keep reviving ourselves. resuscitating. Thank you very much for the beautiful.
My name is Anthony, Anthony Schwartz.
As you go on.
Well done. Excellent, I think that's such a possible for
So the Simpsons, yes. Gentlemen, yes. Since we grew up together.